Well, hello, students. Can you believe that we are already in week 8? That's amazing. We are on our last week. And I want to congratulate you for if you have remained in the program. And there's a lot to do in this particular type of program. It's very intense, but it is also very, very doable if you're able to do a couple of really good threads and respond to your classmates. Because when you think about it, that's where most of the learning takes place. I can give you the tools and the resources from your book. I can put comments in, use YouTube videos, video cams, but really, all of you coming from such rich cultures and putting it all together really gives you a perspective of what organizations do and how they do it. And actually, some of you can learn from others in the course on what they're doing to make a difference. But anyway, it was a great ride. I want you guys to keep in touch. Definitely do that. To me, and I've done this with all my students over the years, I don't think that a relationship ends with your students when the class ends. I think it goes far beyond that. I really mean that. I think that, I have students that I've had 7, 8, 10 years ago asking me for letters of recommendation. They say to me, "Do you remember me?" And I say, "Oh, yeah, you were in this class." Well, sometimes I don't, believe me. I've taught thousands of students over the years, but for the most part, if they give me a little bit of a clue, we can remember specifics of what they did and how they did it. But online, we can build great relationships as well. The idea is that communicating with one another, creating a learning forum is just so important. It's really part of the mix. Okay, enough on that. I want to look at the last 2 chapters of the course, and that is on chapters 16 and 17. So let's talk about 16. We talked about the structure of organizations in 15. Here in 16, we're talking about the organizational culture. Now, remember when I said to you before that the hardware, if we were a computer, would be like the structure, and the software would be the culture. The culture is what you think makes the organization tick. It tells the hardware what to do. The hardware basically is the mechanical part of things, but the software has the ability to change things up to relate to that external environment. When we did the SWOT, we talked about the external environment. That is what the culture does. It sets the tone of everyone in the organization. So this chapter essentially is going to examine organizational culture. And it's going to look at the effects culture has on members within the organization. And what can those that are involved in the culture really learn from the culture? For example, you guys set up a classroom culture. Although it's online, it's still a culture. Other professors may be teaching the same course in other venues, but this culture is unique to the people that are in it. So the other thing is, if the culture is unique to the organization, if it needs to be changed, how can it be changed? So the objectives of this particular chapter are going to be to describe the common characteristics of organizational culture. What makes up an organizational culture? We're going to compare the functional and dysfunctional effects of organizational culture on people and the organization as a whole. One individual comes into a group, that's one culture. Groups work together, That's another culture which sets the tone for the whole organization. We want to be able to identify the factors that create and sustain an organizational culture. How do we keep our branding? How do people relate to us from our inception, where the vision was? Like, how did Steve Jobs relate to Apple? Even when he passed away after 2011, how does his culture, a semblance of him, remain in the organization? The other thing we're going to study is how culture is transmitted to our employees. How do they know about it? And we're going to describe the similarities and differences in creating an ethical culture. All right, we're going to talk about a positive culture and a spiritual culture. We're going to show how national culture may affect the way organizational culture is interpreted in other countries. So that's what we're going to talk about in chapter 16. Finally, in 16, when we talk about culture, we're going to be spending 3 days on that. And then we're going to be spending 4 days on chapter 17, our last chapter, which is going to be about dealing with organizational change and stress management. So this chapter is all about change. We look at environmental forces that require managers to implement change programs when they need to be. Transformational managers, we're going to be talking about those types of managers. Transactional, transformational. And this is where charismatic leaders really shine through. We also are going to consider why people and organizations resist change. Well, obviously, a lot of people don't like to come out of their comfort zones. And how can we, as an organization, manage resistance to change? And finally, we're going to discuss contemporary work stress. Yeah, work stress. How do managers deal with it? How do employees deal with it? And how do managers deal with it with their employees? So after studying this chapter, you should be able to contrast the forces for change and plan change. Change is when we don't plan it and it happens. That's reactive change. Plan change is proactive. We know something's going to change and we prepare everyone to do it. The key thing is when you don't know things are going to change, when you react to it, how do you keep everything still on course? And we're going to describe the ways to overcome resistance to change. What can we do with individuals who just don't want to come out of their comfort zones? We're going to look at the 4 main approaches to managing organizational change. And we're going to demonstrate 3 ways of creating a culture for change. That's right, a culture that accepts and understands change. How do we deal with that? Then we're going to identify the potential environmental, organizational, and personal sources of stress. And we're going to look at the role individuals play when cultural differences exist. We're going to look at the psychological, the physiological, and the behavioral symptoms of stress at work. And finally, we're going to describe individual and organizational approaches to managing stress at work. So how do we, as a company, manage and deal with stress? So these are the types of things we're going to do in these next 2 chapters and final 2 chapters. Good luck with it, Professor DeChico.